Travel around to development, DevOps, and other conferences to talk to you about how you're getting everything wrong, because it turns out when you get it wrong, it comes down on me, and I don't love that. I'm super lazy. This is really what's going on. So, fear of the bus is a joke in IT where we say, does your company go under if one person gets hit by a bus? If your build engineer is run over by a bus or wins the lottery, which is the less gruesome alternative, do you have what it takes to keep the company going? Because lots of times, people do in fact have one person so key that they are heavily life insured and it's just enough insurance to shut the company down. Like, that's a real thing that happens. But we don't have to be like that. We could do better. So there are a lot of reasons that a person may become unavailable. They may have personal life issues, they may get sick, they may get hit by a bus, and also there are lots of reasons that you could have some kind of problem reaching each other. You could have a natural disaster, you could have some kind of massive IT outage. That never happens to us. Anything could happen, and you need to be able to pick up and run with wherever something has dropped. And because I do documentation in a bunch of different companies, I know that DevOps people are always running as fast as they can to keep just up with staying in pace. Like, you're just running as fast as you can, and you don't have any time to waste doing documentation or any other niceties like that. And I understand that, and that's why I come in and do what I do, which is help people who don't have any documentation. But it turns out that human memory, like RAM, is volatile storage. Even if you get someone to write something down, they put it in their super messy wiki. How many of you like how your wiki works? Like, are you using your wiki? Yeah. Can you find things in it the first time? But people will put things in their wiki, and then they'll give you a pointer to it. But if you lose that person, then poof, all of the pointers to your information are gone. And you can never get that back. Like, you could search the wiki and you may be able to find the information if they wrote it down, but more likely, the most recent stuff is actually in their head and they haven't done anything about that. So, when we think about redundancy, I always think about suspension bridges. Each of these cables is actually several cables coiled around each other. There's actually some really cool YouTube videos on how they make bridge cables. They have special coiling machines. But if any one of the wires that makes up these cables and any one of the cables that makes up the bridge goes out, the bridge doesn't fall down immediately. That's the whole concept of redundancy. I think a lot of times when we talk about redundancy, we talk about it in terms of servers. And I think that's actually a less useful metaphor because it's really the structure of the company that we're talking about. So here are my core principles for doing DevOps documentation. Everyone has to be able to touch the documentation. I've been doing technical writing a long time. I've had technical writing tools that are like sacred and secret and special, and you only get like 4 licenses in the entire company, and it's all stored in like an executable format, and you can't even diff it, right? Don't use that tool for your internal documentation. That's the wrong choice. The next thing is that content matters more than presentation. Don't spend any time making it pretty. Not any. Like, maybe I will let you put a heading in. But I don't care if you spelled it wrong, unless it's actually a machine name. I don't care if you formatted it. I don't care if you put italics in. I just want to make sure that the content is there. And the last thing is that docs reduce burnout. The more times you interrupt someone, the less flow they have in their life. And flow is one of the things that makes us happy. It's one of the things that makes us feel like we're being productive in our job, is to actually be rolling along and accomplishing things. And every time someone asks you a question, you have to drop all the processes that you were working on in your head, like remembering where everything was, and remember something new and relate it to them. And then you're just left with this pile of processes at your feet, and you're like, right, okay, where was I? Maybe I was getting some coffee. That seems like a great plan. So you lose a lot of time whenever someone interrupts you with a question. So the more docs that you can put in where somebody else can find it, the less irritated you're going to be. So I said those were the core principles, but here's the thing that I want you to remember when you are thinking about whether or not you want to write something. Bad data is worse than missing data. Getting something wrong is worse than not doing it at all. Like, I'm sure you all have a painful example from your early sysadmin lead days where you took something down by being wrong instead of just leaving it alone for somebody else to do. Missing data, although not as bad data, is still bad. Ugly data saves lives. It does not have to be beautiful to save lives. It doesn't have to be beautiful to save your company. You just need to have it there. So I don't care what it looks like, I just want it there. So there are 3 categories of data that, as DevOps in particular, you're dealing with. There's data that's automatable, there's data that's structural, and there's data that's secret. So let's talk about how we address these. Automatable data. You want to write down how to build a server the first time you do it, as long as you think you got it more or less right. And then you want to automate it, because you never want to have to read documentation on how to build a server, do you? Do you like doing that? No. I don't like doing that either. And I'm pretty sure that your future self would really appreciate it if you just made it a script. So anything that can be automated, you need to automate as soon as possible. And there are a lot of arguments about whether or not that's optimal, whether or not you're using your time wisely by automating, which takes a little longer, rather than just doing it the one time. You probably have a feel for that. Like, this is a one-off, or this is going to be something I have to do every week. I think of automation as teaching your kids how to do chores. I have a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I have still not gotten them to scrub a pan properly. Like, we got the dishwasher thing, we got the sweeping thing, we got the bed making thing. Scrubbing pans is evidently super hard. I'm going to go home after 2 weeks away, and the kitchen will be a nightmare. But if I spend the time now to teach them how to do these chores, like sweeping, then that's less work for me. I've now made child processes that go out and do these things for me. So every time you think about, yes, yeah, literally, you want to think about it in the same way. Can I make this process run on its own so I don't have to think about it? Or at least so I only have to remind it and not do it. That would be lots better than doing it myself. The next category of things is structural. And there are 2 kinds of structures. One is the organizational structure of what you put your documents in. And that means basically, like, this is a build script, these are all the build scripts. This is a bug report, these are all the bug reports. You just want to group like kinds of information together. The second kind of structural thing is a template. And templates are super nice because they really require a lot less cognitive load. So here is a Jira board. Aren't we all excited? Yes, Jira is super complex, but you know what it's not? It's not thought-provoking. You just need to go in and check off all the right boxes. It's not like you have to write out paragraphs of, and this is user visible, and this is in 6.1, and this is, you don't have to do that. You don't have to remember what you're supposed to include in the bug. All you have to do is check the boxes that define what categories the bug is in. So even though we don't love doing this, it's a lot better than writing a free-form bug report that had to include everything that we put in a Jira ticket. The other thing that we want to document as sort of a template is our workflow, because we want to say, this is the predictable way things happen so that when it fails, we know what point it failed at. And I know you do this with monitoring. You're like, packet, 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 explosion, packet, packet. Okay, I know where the problem is. You need the same kind of thing for what you're doing every day. And so what you want to do is make things into a punch list so that, again, you're just checking things off instead of having to manually generate pages of thought. So if you terminate someone, you have to cut their last check, and you have to notify insurance, and you have to lock them out of the system. And you don't want to forget any of those steps. So if you make it into a template and into a workflow, you're going to be a lot better off. And if you don't store structural information in a place where people find it, They're going to do ad hoc work and stuff is going to get missed. And the last thing about templates, and this is bitter experience speaking, you need to keep a clean copy someplace where no one else can find it, because it doesn't matter how much you file lock it and name it do not overwrite, somebody will overwrite your template with their information because, I don't know, humans are terrible. The third kind of information that you need to keep is secret information. And this is the sort of thing that we are least inclined to write down because it's scary to have it written down. This is the sort of thing that we don't want other people to know. But it's also exactly the sort of thing that we haven't told anybody else, and if we get hit by a bus, they're kind of out of luck. So if you work for a bigger organization, you probably have a security team that handles like threat modeling and other kinds of like how you should store certain types of information, and they've sent you a memo which you haven't read. You can go find it on your SharePoint, which is where they always want to put these things. But, I don't know, SharePoint. But you can also do this on your own. You could think to yourself, what happens if this data is lost forever? Like, if nobody knows this data, how bad is it for the company? What happens if the data is found by good actors? Like, what happens if somebody in my company stumbles across payroll? Well, that's not ideal, but they're not likely to like sink your company. And finally, what happens if the data is found by bad actors? Like, what if a malicious person gets a hold of this data? Answering these questions helps you define where you're going to store it. Secret information needs to be documented because we need to be able to use it and replicate it. So what happens when you fire the one marketing person who knows the login for the website? Do you know how much money you have to pay your hosting provider to convince them that you're the real person who has access to this website? It's a lot. And also, you still don't have any of the source files. So that's super painful, and that's a tiny example. What happens when you lose, say, your Microsoft support contract? Again, super expensive and painful. So you have to make sure that you're storing this stuff somewhere that everybody can, not everybody, but somewhere that approved people can get to it. So no matter what kind of information you're documenting, it needs to have these three virtues. It's got to be findable. People have to be able to locate it wherever you've put it. And it's got to be usable. It's got to answer the question that they're actually asking, as opposed to like the question you think that you might have had when you started a job 10 years ago. And it's got to be current, because there is nothing worse than running a script that says current build procedure, and then finding out that script is 2 years old and we're all actually using new build procedure. And not that that comes from personal experience, but it totally does. So you have to make sure that all of your data follows these three core values. You know what I don't care about? I don't care if it's pretty, I already said that. I don't care if it's fancy. I don't care if it looks nice as a PDF. That's not important. I don't even care if it's friendly and easy to use. Like, if the only way you can get the documentation out of somebody is to let them write this huge long paragraph without any paragraph breaks, I don't care. At least you can find it, at least you can use it. You can talk to them later about their poor grasp on language. So you need to be collecting this data, but that's hard. I understand that because I spent a lot of time sitting on people's desks and reminding them that they were going to get that to me last week. Would you like a cookie? So it doesn't just mean telling people that they should write down what they're doing. It means making it easy to write things down and giving them a place where they could just drop things without thinking about where to put it. And it means a cultural change about expectations. So instead of saying, hey, would you document this? You say, hey, this isn't finished because it's not documented. It's a difficult change for a lot of us, but I think it's super important to do. So the first thing I suggest people do when I come into their company is do a documentation audit, because it turns out most people have a lot more documentation than they think they do. It's just some random place. So when you're doing a documentation audit, you figure out what you already have and where it is. And then you do analytics. You can install Google Analytics on almost anything, like even internal stuff. You can install Google Analytics. It's a little weird, but you can do it. You need to know what people are actually looking for, and the only way you're going to find that is by looking at the search terms. So set up analytics, let it run for a little while, see what's happening. Yeah. Collecting information doesn't have to be about writing a lot of new information. It's finding the information that's already out there. And I guarantee you somebody has written some key network principle on a Post-it note and stuck it under their keyboard. Because that's just how it happens. So all you have to do is figure out who exactly is the Post-it fiend and look under their keyboard and find that information and put it someplace better. They also keep it in their personal folders and on the desktops of their machines. I don't know why people like to store stuff there because it's extremely volatile, but they do. There's like people who have just desktops full of documents on how to run things. So you need to figure out what tasks you're trying to perform. Like, AWS went down, oh crap, what do I do now? Right? You need to have some documentation for that. So you want a punch list of the things you do, like find out if AWS is down for everyone or just me. That's like the first item on your punch list. You need to have a list of the people who are responsible for this kind of problem so that you can call and wake them up. You need to have a workflow for how you're going to fix it. You need to have support info for AWS. Hello. You appear to be down in EC1 again. And you need to have the dependencies that this task has. So if rebooting something means that you not only have to start the server we're talking about, but also like this ancient sun machine, you need to write down that dependency because otherwise it will get missed in a moment of crisis. So finding stuff. Finding stuff is not easy. I really recommend the one long document method for DevOps documentation. It's super ugly and it is not at all tech writing best practice, but you just put stuff at the top and it scrolls down. And hopefully like you scroll stuff off the bottom when it stops being right, because if you have any DevOps procedure that lasts longer than a year, I'm frankly astonished. So you should just archive the stuff at the very bottom. Just put it on there, because you know what? We have search, and we could just look for it. And it makes it so much easier because there's one bookmark that everybody knows they can either go look for stuff or put stuff into. Super straightforward. We think of search as sort of a miracle, but one of the reasons it works is because we have learned to index in our minds. So up until about 5 years ago, what do you call this? Up until 5 years ago, you could not search Microsoft's site for the phrase blue screen of death, even though that's what we've all called it for 15 years. But it didn't occur in their index. So you have to be using search terms and keywords that are actually what the people you are working with use. So if you called this a fatal exception error, you would never find it. And you would never find the fix that lived with it. You had to know exactly what your error number was. So, think about what you're putting in so that people can search on it. I think 10 plus years of Gmail has essentially ruined our minds for anything but search. But the reason that Gmail works is because theoretically we've read most of those emails and we have an idea what the keyword we're searching on is. So 18F is a part of the American General Services Administration, which sounds super boring and is in fact, but 18F is this adorable little startup embedded in the government, and they do a lot of really innovative technology things. So when they use Slack, what they do is somebody says, oh hey, here's how to, and they write it in chat, and then they or someone else puts a unique emoji next to it that says, we should capture this data. So then you can automate going through your Slack and pulling out anything that's next to the little cactus emoji and putting it in your documentation or wherever you want to have it. I actually gave a part of this talk at another conference and I ran into the guy who wrote the HuBot that does this. So when I release my slides, his name is Mike Bland. When I release my slides, there's a GitHub repository to the HuBot that will do that. So hey, value add. So information has a shelf life. It goes bad. It goes bad much faster than you think it does. It gets rotten. And we need to remember that we're essentially serving up rotten milk whenever we're giving people old data. If I could do it, I would tag all information with a date, and when it exceeds a certain age, it just gets tossed. But that's problematic for a lot of reasons. So instead, and if I say this at enough conferences, someone will make it for me, I want a Confluence plugin that gradually ages the text from black to white, so that by the time data is a year old, it's nothing but white on white. And if you want to use it, you have to highlight it. It should be relatively trivial, but nobody's written it for me yet. Because I want people to know instantly, without looking at a date at the top, which we never do, or without like running it and then failing, which we do all the time, that data is old and useless. I have a whole nother talk about how keeping data is expensive and increases our security threat surface, but I'm not going into that today. What I am going to say is that if someone, like a new hire, is looking at your internal documentation, you want them to have the new stuff and not the old garbage. All of the hardest problems in computers are people. That's what you keep hearing in this room over and over again, and I think it's true. So I want to tell you that testing is for everyone, and here's how you know if you got your DevOps documentation right. You heard of the chaos monkey theory, where you take a server offline, take a person offline. Say, hey, you had a really rough night, give me your pager, give me your work phone, we're not going to call you. We are, I guarantee it, not going to call you. And then see what breaks. Because as soon as you take somebody off pager rotation, the thing that only they know how to fix will break. And then, true story. And then you will know whether or not you have documented it adequately to survive their actual absence. Because you will know you've had to look it up. Never call someone in the hospital. You should, like this should be obvious, but it's sadly not true. I know people who have gotten ops calls in the hospital, right? And so if you test under load but not under pressure, then you're going to know whether or not you can survive under pressure when Maria's in the hospital and you had better not call her because she is much busier than she cares about to deal with you. So if you do this testing in advance, in little iterations, in little pain points, it's so much better than a catastrophic failure. Because DevOps docs save you time, and they save you money, and they save you from having to put up a picture of the Hindenburg where your uptime stats used to be. So if this talk was too long and you read Twitter instead, write it down, because that's easier and safer than remembering it. And if you want more specific answers, I'm doing a, what do we call it? Open space. Thank you. I'm doing an open space, and you can come ask me about your specific problem, and I will give you an answer and also my business card.